Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, whichever part of the world you are in. I would like to welcome you to the thought leadership regarding Fintech 3.0 and DeFi landscape in Southeast Asia by UBX. With us today, we're very privileged to be joined by no less than, of course, our President and CEO, Mr. Januszczak of UBX, our partner with Intergra Partners, Mr. Jinesh Patel, and of course, founder and CEO of BloomX, Mr. Israel Keys. I'll be your moderator for today. My name is Cyrus. I'm the UBX Singapore country head, and we'll spend the next 30 minutes to discuss about Fintech 3.0 and the DeFi landscape in Southeast Asian market. And before we jump into the main topic, we'd like to invite our guest for some quick personal and company introductions, starting with my boss, of course, Mr. John Januszczak.
Thanks, Cyrus, and great to be here with Israel and Jinesh. I'm John Januszczak. I'm with UBX. UBX is the Philippines' leading open finance platform. We were spun out of Union Bank of the Philippines in late 2018. And we believe in a future of embedded, invisible financial services. Companies, government, digital platforms, financial service providers, and developers can bundle and integrate a wide range of embeddable financial and data services to grow their businesses, hyper-personalized for their customers, and contextually appropriate for the customer journeys they're enabling. UBX fosters innovation. We build, we aggregate, and we virtualize and operate the open financial infrastructure upon which our clients can monetize and expand. We create interoperability between the financial services that we embed, between hundreds of financial institutions and service providers. And we do this behind trusted brands and a single API that powers thousands of businesses and their platforms. I guess, Cyrus, I'll finish this by saying, while we have invested in open finance, we see the open finance revolution not just being about embeddable financial services, but growing to be something much more decentralized and disintermediated.
Thank you for that, John. That I will hand it over to the very intimidating, as we've discussed earlier, Mr. Jinesh Patel for the introduction.
Thanks, Cyrus, for that lovely introduction. My name is Jinesh. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm the partner for a fund based in Singapore called Intergra Partners. We're an early stage investor, essentially in financial services and fintech. Our core thesis has been that over the last 5 years, as we've seen globally, financial inclusion and the drivers of kind of the fintech revolution will take place across vast parts of Southeast Asia and across multiple sectors. And so our focus has been really to target and unearth basically the young companies that we think are going to be the drivers of that revolution in this part of the world. We've made about 30 investments across a broad category of financial services, including actually on the technology side as well. But our focus, as I said, is in Southeast Asia, and it's great to be on this panel to talk about DeFi.
Thank you very much, Jinesh. A bit more friendlier this time around, I guess. And we hand it over now to founder and CEO of BloomX, Mr. Israel Keys.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this morning, and good to see you guys. Yep, my name's Israel Keys. I'm the founder and CEO of BloomX. We founded BloomX in the Philippines back in 2015, really with a mission to reduce the cost of remittances. Remittances being money transferred by Filipinos into the country. Philippines has been, one of the biggest recipients of remittances around the world. And, what we found in the early days was that the people who were sending the smallest or least amount of money into the country were actually spending the most on a percentage basis. And so we sent out to kind of tackle that problem. And we were one of the first companies in the Philippines to leverage blockchain technology or cryptocurrencies. It was a bit taboo to talk about those things back in the day in 2015. and I was encouraged more to talk about blockchain rather than cryptocurrencies. But fast forward to today, cryptocurrencies have become a norm and all the rage, and we've expanded our product offering more recently and rolling out a new retail-facing application which gives Filipinos access to more than 250 different types of cryptocurrencies. And we believe that being able to leverage these technologies and reaching people who have never actually accessed formalized institutional finance before really gives them the opportunity to leapfrog into the next era of finance. So thank you again for having me on.
Thanks, Israel, for joining us today. I'm actually personally guilty of that. In my previous role, anytime I heard about cryptocurrency, I got allergic to it. But I think to your point, first mover's advantage is always key. And of course, we say this in jest right now. But more importantly, we should take things seriously as well and identifying what are these emerging technologies and what that means for developing markets like the Philippines. With that being said, I also know of Intergra for more than 3 years now. Hence, I'm a bit more friendlier than Jinesh now. But with that being said, Jinesh, I know Intergra has been at the forefront of identifying new fintech models, particularly and more specifically for the Southeast Asian market. And this is a thing that Intergra has been doing quite well over the past few years, as evident with your fund and your investment with startups. With that being said, I would like to know from you, Jinesh, what is Fintech 3.0 and what's the current landscape in Southeast Asia? And what does this mean for the Philippine market?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's important to understand the evolution of fintech, right? So Fintech 1.0 was the move from analog to digital. And that started up in the early noughties. Then we, in the last 5 to 6 years, and something that UBX is building quite expansively and very well, is the move from productized and service offerings to an embedded finance model, or as many people call it, open finance. But the big shift that I think is going to take place, and I think this is really an overhaul of the way that financial services is going to play a role in everyone's lives, is the move from kind of centralized frameworks and architectures to a decentralized structure, a decentralized world. And I think that this shift is probably one of the biggest we're going to see probably in this technological revolution that we're seeing globally. And DeFi itself, which is the iteration of Fintech 3.0, is at the kind of forefront of driving that change. And if I think about where that applicability is the greatest in Southeast Asia, it's really around financial inclusion. As Israel mentioned, there are so many elements of traditional finance that do not serve the bottom of the pyramid. And DeFi in its fundamental core is there to essentially look at ways of crowding in everyone in the kind of ecosystem from the bottom all the way to the incumbents on the top. And one of the most interesting things that we've seen is that, maybe 3 years ago, you could have asked me, where is the Philippines leading in the world on this, which addresses your question about the Philippines is relevant. But if you look at the intersection of DeFi and gaming today, the global leaders in play to earn are the likes of Axie and the likes of Yo-Yo Games. And so we're now starting to see completely the kind of decentralized approach and borderless approach to where DeFi is really driving change in value. And you could say that this is one of the biggest themes that we think is going to be interesting for both our strategy as well as some of the projects that we're working on.
Thanks, Jinesh. Probably just a follow-up question. I think you brought up the prevalence of Axie Infinity and this gaming-related cryptos, play-to-earn models. But what's next after that from a consumer perspective? Where do you see the platform in terms of adoption for decentralized finance heading? What are the other models that will be easier to adopt for markets like the Philippines?
I think if you think about the subcategories of financial services, whether that's in credit, whether that's in insurance, whether that's in microservices, the beauty of a decentralized approach is that you can bring the cost of delivery and the user experience to the point where it's accessible, fundamentally, right? And I keep saying that DeFi is a big equalizer because it actually drives inclusion to the very bottom of the pyramid. But I think that the mechanisms or the incentives within that ecosystem will drive that. And if you ask me, or if you ask Gabby Dizon, who's the founder of YGG, who started, by the way, back in 2015, 16, how long it took for him to get to this point, it shows that once there is momentum and once there is adoption, the realities are that these can be very large addressable markets and opportunities. And so I think it's not just the Philippines, it's where the Philippines wants to play broadly in DeFi globally, right? And there'll be some categories in which the Philippines will lead and others where they will be just a fast follower. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome is not significant for all the participants in the space.
Thanks, Jinesh. Speaking of access for all, that has been our mandate for UBX in the past 3 years that we've been established. And I do like what you've mentioned, Jinesh, that this decentralized finance model is not really going to catapult us in terms of the Philippine market, but will also open up opportunities for us in the region and potentially globally. With that being said, for John, related to Fintech 3.0, what has UBX done to help prepare for this? And what steps is the company doing in terms of leading Fintech 3.0?
Yeah, Cyrus, I really like what Israel said in his introduction. It seems that part of the origin story of BloomX, for example, was to leverage this new technology for a fairly traditional use case, the sending of remittances. And I think that's exactly how UBX has started on this journey as well. We've used a similar vector where we have multiple uses of Fintech 3.0 technology in our existing open finance stack. So for example, underlying our payments, collections, and disbursements infrastructure, we use a blockchain-based real-time, what's effectively an automated clearinghouse. And we're doing that on the back of DeFi technology to make it accessible and affordable, economically viable for all participants in our platform. We implemented the first central bank approved stablecoin in the Philippines, which we call PHX. And we've tokenized and used the blockchain to power asset classes. And along those lines, we are also making investments not just in our own blockchain and DeFi capabilities, but we're investing in others. One of our investments is the Philippine Digital Asset Exchange, PDAX. And with PDAX, we worked with them to launch bonds.ph, which is a blockchain-powered platform that makes sovereign bonds accessible at very low ticket size to the retail investor. Whether it's been working with PDAX, whether it's been working on our blockchain-based payments platform, we have worked with the regulator along the way. Obviously, our BSP or central bank approved stablecoin is a great example that could never have happened without working with the regulator and having that regulatory cover. So these traditional use cases like funds transfer, payments, retail investments, that's how we've started with DeFi, crypto, and blockchain technology. Along the way, we've built up significant crypto and DeFi capabilities. And so now we're moving towards supporting decentralized finance directly with first class or DeFi first use cases. For example, we recently launched our Cardano staking pool. It's the first ever globally by a regulated institution. And at the same time, we are building seamless integration and interoperability between traditional finance and Fintech 3.0. So for example, something as simple as allowing a consumer to pay by crypto or with their crypto, and for that payment to be settled with the merchant in fiat.
Thanks, John. I think we're able to showcase quite well for our audiences who might get intimidated by the terms of Fintech 3.0 and decentralized finance. I agree with you. Use cases in remittance, retail investments, and also collections are very relevant to our end consumers. With that as well, I think also one thing that UBX has been doing quite well, me even being part of the team, is our very focus on regulatory and compliance. And I think that's a big facet of the adoption of the layman consumer in terms of adopting to crypto. Speaking of which, for Israel, as part of Fintech 3.0, how will BloomX play a role in this space? And what are the opportunities and challenges you're facing? And how can partnerships with the likes of UBX help?
Sure, thanks. Maybe if I may, let's just share a little story. I worked in a country called Mozambique about 15 years ago, one of the poorest countries in the world. And it's not uncommon when you travel around Africa in general to find these kind of wooden carvings of people. And I remember coming across this carving of what looked like a man, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I asked the guy in my broken Portuguese, what is this? And the guy basically said, this is the modern day Mozambican businessman. And what he was holding, the statue was holding in his hand, was the mobile phone. So at the time, mobile phones were giving basically these Mozambicans who were at the poorest rungs of finance in the world, the ability to kind of decentralize their business. They were holding mobile phones throughout the country. They were leapfrogging the kind of landlines that traditional business was kind of incumbent to and literally tethered to. And I see kind of what's happening in the finance space and the crypto space, this decentralization really placing the power in the hands, possibly a little bit more nebulous than the mobile phone, but placing the power in the hands of individuals to own their own assets, to be custodians of their own assets for the first time. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity in being able to be responsible for that. If you look at Bitcoin, managing multiple keys, getting people to understand multi-signature wallets and all these things as part of decentralized finance is a complicated road. So Bloom kind of positions itself as a bit of a usability company, perhaps. So we're not trying to build another blockchain. We're not trying to kind of create the next Ethereum or the next Bitcoin, but instead we're trying to kind of bridge the gap between where the technology is at and making that usable for the general public. And as I said earlier, we started out in remittances, and it's great to see the cost of remittances go down just even in the last 5 years. And we always envisioned that people will eventually be able to transfer funds peer-to-peer or by sending tokens directly to each other. And it's just happened a lot faster than we expected. So we're seeing now just a broad interest in lots of different cryptocurrencies, people getting into it either by playing games or developing art. It's fantastic to see. And so for us as a company, we are set on providing that access through the software that we develop. So we are a technology company. We're building technology that allows people to access those technologies. And I think what's great about it is that you can have Filipinos who are in the Philippines, locked down, say of COVID, and earning money now, and playing on the world scale that previously was inaccessible to them. And so Bloom, sees itself as being part of that revolution. We're certainly not the only one part of it, and we partner, in particularly with others and with UBX, providing that interoperability between kind of the old finance world and the new finance world and that bridge. And so we're just really part of the journey, but also trying to kind of just accelerate the access for a lot of average Filipinos.
Thanks, Israel. If I may just continue to have a follow-up question. In terms of looking for bank partners, what are the characteristics? I mean, of course, with bias, I'll be putting us in the spot here for UBX. But I mean, in general, perhaps for startups who are watching this, who are looking to potentially partner and maybe may not have had the same exposure as yourself, Of course, they'll be able to not only for bank partners or maybe even some traditional institutions for that matter. What are the things that you'd be looking on to have a cohesive and a very fruitful partnership with these traditional financial institutions?
Sure. So, I mean, if you go to the Philippines, first thing you'll notice around traveling around the streets are a lot of cash delivery trucks everywhere. Because literally the Philippines deals a lot with cash. And so one of the first requirements of a good banking partner in the Philippines is one that's digital. And so I think UBX is probably the only one that is kind of really pushing the boundaries in both the promotion, but also its experimentation of kind of digital banking in the Philippines. And really, the future is somewhat, still unknown. So looking for a partnership in that space is really a partnership in kind of values and sentiment towards the greater vision of what we're trying to do. A lot of banks in the Philippines are, unfortunately, are not set up by families, wealthy families in the country, and are there to service those wealthy families. And so having a vision to reach the 70% of people who are unbanked and finding that alignment with a digital bank is really key, I think, in terms of finding a partner that you can work towards an unknown future, but a future where we can have greater inclusion. So UBX ticks all those boxes if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to hear, Israel. But no, again, just aside, apologies for the very friendly panel here. But yes, that's very much part of our mission. It's what John mentioned earlier. That's why we set up UBX, is to be able to serve to the other 70% of the Philippine market. And of course, to echo what Jinesh mentioned earlier, gearing us up for a regional and global play as a very good use case starting off in the Philippines. But of course, as we've discussed, Israel, in terms of challenges and identifying the right partner, maybe a question for Jinesh and what you've seen in the fintech landscape over the years of experience you've been working in Southeast Asia. What do you think financial institutions and startups need to take into consideration to ensure that they are on track with their DeFi mission? I think what we've been seeing is there's a lot of noise and buzz around this space, and everybody would like to talk about blockchain. And I think I always like what Israel mentioned earlier regarding crypto in 2015, and it was taboo. And I think I'm liking that we're seeing a level of maturity in the industry right now. But yeah, I mean, what would you recommend or advise for financial institutions and startups to be able to keep focus and make sure that we have practical results with what we're trying to do?
I mean, I think the big thing that needs to change is that there is going to have to be a huge mindset shift. Because if you genuinely believe, like we do, that over the next 20, 30 years, decentralized finance and all the aspects of DeFi will essentially reset and overhaul the existing traditional financial systems, frameworks, regulations, the route will be messy, but it will be significant. And if you read a brilliant article written by an individual called Matt Harris, who's one of the top fintech investors in the world, where he talks about the future of money. The addressable market, when we as a VC look for opportunities, we always look at TAMs, right? What is the TAM of underwriting? What is the TAM of insurance? What is the TAM for DeFi? It's $12 trillion. And so the level of development, the pace at which it will grow will be quite significant. And this is not just about financial institutions or startups, it's about all the major participants that touch any aspect of financial services. And so for us, the big thing is to try and find, in that messy road to a kind of DeFi world, what you're good at and how you can essentially manage the stakeholder interest in the ecosystem. Fundamentally, if I'm a central banker or a regulator or a regulated financial institution, the next 20 years is going to be rocky. And so there is either the view that this is an opportunity or that this is a threat. And if you look at just open banking, for example, which is something that UBX is pioneering in the region, both domestically and some of our portfolio companies, the level of inertia that you get from financial institutions to even start opening up APIs and interacting with third parties is enormous. And in some countries, it's much further down the road than in others. But imagine if there's an overhaul of who the intermediaries are, because there is no single intermediary or no single API platform. When you go to a DeFi world, there is no longer a stakeholder that determines the transfer value or the regulatory value or the social identity value. And so therefore, for me, the biggest shift is mind shift, is that your mindset has to change. And I think that startups as well as incumbents are going to have to think about where they position themselves for that kind of future.
Thanks, Jinesh. Related to that, Israel, is what Jinesh has mentioned in terms of mindset and, of course, taking into consideration the fluidity of regulatory considerations. What has BloomX done to be able to anticipate and keep track of this material changes?
I mean, there's a lot going on in the space. It's hard to keep up, I think. But I think I resonate with what Jinesh says. It's really kind of a shift in mindset in terms of how to think about the world and how to think about finance and money and flow of funds and flow of capital and custody and all of the kind of different aspects that really affect our society. So it's hard to know what society will look like, but I'm a believer that it's going to be more decentralized when it comes to finance, and the way that we are able to operate is going to be allow for greater autonomy. And I think part of that is through greater transparency and individual sovereignty. And so, we as a startup are kind of in that chaos. We're balancing structure and chaos in order to develop and create value as the world is changing, and be part of that revolution that we feel is inevitable. So our contribution, our products that enable people to have access to it, and that's really kind of what we focus on in terms of, in some ways, traditional product development things where we ensure that people are using it and we ensure that we're delivering value, but keeping open and our mindset set on reimagining the world in a decentralized form.
Thanks, Israel. And probably my last question for John. I think Jinesh has pointed it out nicely earlier. And what do we need to stay focused on our DeFi mission? He did mention about having a great mindset as an organization. Err at the side of caution that this could be messy. But of course, that messiness could be addressed on what we are good at UBX. And of course, I think one thing that I keep evangelizing about UBX is, like, as much as innovative as we are, we're also very much focused on regulations as well. With that being said, John, as a leader in the open finance space, how will UBX translate this to be a DeFi leader in the market and in the region?
Yeah, thanks, Cyrus. Before I answer that directly, the messiness that Jinesh alluded to, it's a double-sided coin. So yes, it's messy. As Israel said, it's hard to keep up sometimes. But I think that messiness is indicative of the level of innovation and the speed of innovation that's happening in the decentralized finance ecosystem. And net, I think that is a tremendous positive. Reacting to another thing, Israel shared the story about being in Mozambique. And it wasn't that long ago that banks and financial service providers were working on, well, how do I get my bank app, or how do I enable people to bank by phone? And I think with decentralized finance, the real question is, well, what happens when the phone, that mobile phone, is the bank? I think that is really the opportunity. And Jinesh talked about total addressable market. Just kind of rounding up or rounding down, I've lost track of world population, but I think there's something like 7.5 to maybe close to 8 billion people in the world today. About 1 billion of them are what I think we would collectively say is fully banked. 2 billion, no bank account at all, no access to financial services, and the other 4.5, very underbanked, very, very limited options. And I think the current situation has got us to those numbers today. So the size of the opportunity for decentralized finance is literally like 6.5 billion people. That is the size. So for UBX, what are we going to do? Our strategy is to become the most extensive open finance platform. We'll continue to invest in our APIs and in our platform that naturally links businesses and fintechs and developers to the traditional financial utilities that we aggregate and create interoperability between today. But even while we're doing that, we're already leveraging on the underlying DeFi capabilities. So for example, we recently announced Expanse, our open finance infrastructure for developers. And even with traditional financial service providers and use cases, the Expanse platform uses not just consent-driven, but customer self-sovereignty at core by leveraging our blockchain-based Akin technology. It includes the ability to leverage a DeFi-friendly store of value through our BSP-approved stablecoin, PHX, and it allows access, or it gives access to our decentralized real-time blockchain-based grid through our I-to-I network. And now we'll be expanding on this through investments in decentralized finance capabilities and startups. We will replicate many of the traditional finance capabilities, or we will augment them with unique DeFi capabilities in a native crypto virtual asset environment. In short, more investment with seamless integration and interoperability between all of our services, whether DeFi first, DeFi native, DeFi embedded, or the existing financial services used by millions of people today. So our open finance platform will connect customers and traditional financial markets to the world's most innovative financial operating system and what we think is the future of banking. And if I may, Cyrus, maybe I'll end on a question. What happens when we connect all 110 million Filipinos, not just to the financial services of the country, but to the global economy?
Thanks, John. That's something to ponder upon quite deeply. But yes, very much agree, and very much excited and looking forward, of course, being part of UBX on how that would look like for us in the years to come. So yeah, John has reiterated we've built a very solid foundation for open finance ecosystem, and we'll continue to invest in building capabilities gearing towards decentralized finance. With that being said, I'd like to thank our panel of speakers today, Mr. Januszczak, Jinesh Patel, and of course, Mr. Israel Keys. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Of course, before I close this session, for any of the startups or corporates who would like to get to know UBX more, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're happy to meet with potential corporate partners and startups that will be able to help us and drive our mission in terms of open finance and decentralized finance. Thank you very much.